Hello everybody, welcome to the Bean Part 2 channel where we talk about testimonies and the goodness of God. And today I want to talk about the Hall of Faith, which is in Hebrews 11. And faith is so important to our walk, and it's something we have to rely on. And there are certain seasons in our life where there's transitions, and we might not know what the next step is that the Lord is taking us on if we're embarking in a new destination or a new direction that the Lord has us on. It can be a little unsettling in those times to think, well, where am I going? Where is this path? And sometimes it takes time for the Lord to reveal those things to us. And when we're in these waiting periods, we have to rely on knowing that the Lord is faithful and growing our faith during seasons of waiting. And Hebrews 11, chapter 11, verse 1 defines faith as, now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And that's a good verse to know, just so that we hear people say faith all the time. You'll have jewelry that says faith or bracelets and stuff that say faith. But it's important to stop and think, what is faith? And it's defined right there. The substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So as we are on this journey in earth, there's a lot of times that the future contains things that we don't see yet. Sometimes the Lord reveals things to us, secret things, secret mysteries to us of the future, maybe through dreams. But a lot of times we're going through life and we don't really know what that next step is going to look like or where it's going to take us. And verse 2 is a verse that is often understated, because a lot of times verse 1 is said, but verse 2 is also very important as well. It says, for by it the elders obtained a good testimony. And that's just so important to think about. By faith, the elders obtained a good testimony. And the elders are the people that came before us that are in the rest of the chapter. And so, moving on here, in Hebrews 11, verse 5, by faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. Before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. And I highlighted that second part of the verse. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. Isn't that amazing that his testimony was that he pleased God? I want to have that testimony. It's just amazing to think that was like defined his life. That was his testimony. That's what he was known for, was that he pleased God, and just how powerful that is. And then in verse 7, by faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. And here in verse 7, we see that Noah was divinely warned of things not seen. And sometimes God will divinely warn you of something in your life that's ahead or in a situation, and he will give you that warning, and you need to act on that warning that the Lord gives you. It could be sharing a message with someone that it pertains to, and it could be, in Noah's situation, it was preparing an ark. But it's important that when we receive these warnings from the Lord, that we act on them boldly and in faith, that we are not in fear, but that we believe and we listen when the Lord reveals something to us. And the next verse here in verse 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. And I think it's important to note that Abraham went out not knowing where he was going. Sometimes God doesn't give us the whole plan. Sometimes he just gives us a piece, and then we obey that piece. And sometimes there's a waiting period before that next piece comes into play. And those waiting periods can be difficult, but it's important that we don't give into anxiety of the uncertainty in the situation, but that we rely and believe in faith, knowing that God is faithful, that he will provide the next piece of that puzzle, the next path, the next step that is to come. And we see that in verse 11 when it says, "By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised." And him there is capitalized because it's referencing God. She judged him faithful who had promised. So Sarah judged God as faithful. And I thought about that verse for a while, and I just wanted to kind of phrase it as like, do you judge God to be faithful? It's an interesting way that that's worded there. And it was her faith. It says, "By faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, because she judged him faithful who had promised." And we want to judge God as faithful because he is, and he shows his goodness all the time in various aspects of our life. And it's important to recognize and appreciate the things that God has blessed us with, and that he wants to speak with us. He wants to have a relationship with us, and he wants us to live lives that are marked by faith, and that it becomes our testimony, it becomes our lifestyle. And finally here in Hebrews 11, referencing Moses, verse 24, "By faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasure of Egypt, for which he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible." So Moses endured by seeing him who is invisible. And he wasn't afraid of the king that was physically in front of him, that he could see with his eyes, because he was fixated on the Lord. And we have to keep our eyes on the Lord and not be afraid of man. And if God has given you a message to speak, that we speak it boldly. If God has given you a mission to act or do something, that you act or do something boldly, because you have your eyes fixed on the Lord, and that you're listening to him, and that you're spending time with him. And so here in Hebrews 11 verse 6, it says, "And without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him." By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. And talking about overcoming by faith, it says in verse 32, "And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson, and Samson, and I'm not very good at saying this name, Jephthah of David, and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight, women received back their dead by resurrection." That's powerful testimonies of people overcoming by faith. But we also have this other group of people. In verse 35, it says, "And others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskin and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and ill-treated. Men in whom the world was not worthy, wandered in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect." And then in the commentary in verse 40, "Apart from us, the faith of the Old Testament saints looked forward to the promised salvation, whereas the faith of those after Christ looked back to the fulfillment of that promise. Both groups are characterized by genuine faith that are saved by Christ's atoning work on the cross. And there's a reference to Ephesians 2, chapter 8, verse. Okay, so I have here Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them. And that's so important to note, that we are saved by grace through faith. And in verse 10, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God has prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them. So we want to walk in the path that God has set before us, and we want to endure, and we don't want to be afraid of people. We want to have our eyes fixated on the Lord so that when our life is over, it can be said that we obtained a good testimony by living in faith, and that our testimony is that we please the Lord, which is the best testimony to have. And we will have joy and fellowship with each other in heaven one day. We have that to look forward to. And living life of faith doesn't always mean all the wonderful things like conquering kingdoms. There are many saints that suffered, but we have to keep our eyes fixated on the Lord and know that he will be with us on whatever path that he has us on, and that he has a path that he has for you. And to just seek his wisdom and keep your eyes fixated on the Lord and the good things that he has for you, and that he will give you the strength that you need for the season that you're in, and he will guide you in the next steps. Even when you have an uncertain future, when you're in a waiting period, those are difficult times, and we just have to keep enduring in faith and judging God as faithful, knowing that he is good and that he will continue to provide for us, and he will see us through to the next thing. Thank you.